Long before the Vatican's towering walls and the global presence of the Catholic Church, its story began with just a handful of devoted leaders. These were men who walked in the shadow of the apostles, faced persecution under the Roman Empire, and kept the flame of faith alive in its most fragile years. In this video, we're journeying back nearly 2,000 years to meet the first 5 popes: St. Peter, St. Linus, St. Anacletus, St. Clement I, and St. Evaristus. Their lives were marked by courage, sacrifice, and unshakable conviction, and the foundations they built still support the Church today. So, if you're passionate about uncovering the roots of Christian history, stick around, tap that subscribe button, and share your thoughts in the comments. Peter was no stranger to the sea. Before he was a leader of the Church, he was a fisherman on the shores of Galilee, impulsive, passionate, and quick to speak. It was Jesus himself who looked into Peter's eyes and said, "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." After the resurrection, Peter became the voice of the apostles. He preached at Pentecost, healed the sick, and stood fearlessly before the Sanhedrin, proclaiming Christ in the heart of Jerusalem. But it was Rome, the beating heart of the empire, where Peter would leave his greatest mark. Tradition tells us he shepherded the Christian community there, strengthening believers and guiding them through the brutal persecution of Emperor Nero. In AD 64, the city burned, and Christians became Nero's scapegoats. Arrested and condemned to death, Peter chose crucifixion, but upside down, believing himself unworthy to die as his Lord did. Peter's leadership was more than authority, it was example. He proved that the role of Pope is not about power, but about sacrifice. His courage under fire became the unshakable foundation for all who would follow. When Peter was martyred, the church in Rome was still small, vulnerable, and hunted. Into this fragile moment stepped Linus, a man whose name is quietly recorded in the New Testament itself, in Paul's second letter to Timothy. That brief mention tells us something important. Linus had been close to the apostles, a trusted figure from the church's earliest days. Linus's pontificate was not marked by grand councils or sweeping public reforms. That would have been impossible under the constant threat of persecution. Instead, his leadership was about survival, order, and faithfulness. Tradition credits him with establishing certain customs for Christian worship, helping the community maintain unity and structure despite living in fear. What makes Linus remarkable is not what the world might call achievement, but what the Church calls perseverance. He quietly carried forward Peter's mission, proving that leadership isn't always about standing in the spotlight. Sometimes it's about keeping the flame alive until the storm passes. And for Linus, that storm would eventually take his life as well, sealing his witness with martyrdom. The third pope, Anacletus, sometimes called Cletus, remains a mysterious figure in history. Even his name carries a little intrigue. Ancient records sometimes list Anacletus and Cletus as 2 different men, but most scholars believe they were the same person. That detail alone reminds us that the Church's earliest years were recorded not in polished chronicles, but in scattered memories and precious fragments of testimony. Anacletus took up the mantle of leadership in a Rome still drenched in the memory of Nero's persecution. Christians were not yet free to worship publicly. Suspicion and hostility could turn deadly at any moment. In this climate, Anacletus is said to have ordained a number of new priests, a bold and dangerous act at the time. By expanding the number of shepherds, he ensured that even if leaders were arrested or killed, the faithful would not be left without guidance. Tradition also credits him with building or setting aside places for Christian worship in Rome, small, hidden gathering sites that would one day evolve into the grand basilicas of the city. But in his time, they were safe havens, lit by oil lamps and strengthened by whispered prayers. His own end came, like those before him, in the shadow of martyrdom. The pattern was becoming clear. In these first decades, the papacy was not a seat of power. It was a sentence of death, accepted willingly for the sake of the flock. With Clement I, the papacy steps into clearer historical light. He is remembered not only as a leader, but as one of the earliest Christian writers whose words have survived to this day. His famous Letter to the Corinthians, written while he was Bishop of Rome, is the oldest Christian document outside of the New Testament still in our hands. In that letter, Clement addressed division within the Corinthian church. His tone was firm yet pastoral, calling for unity, humility, and respect for the leaders appointed by God. What's striking is how naturally he speaks with the authority of the Pope, guiding believers far beyond Rome's borders. His words echo the very heart of early Christianity, that the church is one body, bound together by love and obedience to Christ. Clement's life was not without hardship. Tradition says he served during the reign of Emperor Domitian, a ruler known for his suspicion of anything that challenged Roman order. Eventually, Clement was exiled to the distant Crimea, forced to work in the stone quarries. Yet even there, he became a source of hope, preaching to fellow prisoners and converting many. The legends of his martyrdom tell a striking story, tied to an anchor and cast into the sea. Whether every detail is historically exact or not, the image is powerful. The anchor, an ancient Christian symbol of hope, becoming both the instrument of his death and the sign of his unshakable faith. Through his writings and his witness, Clement gave the church more than leadership. He gave it a voice that still speaks across the centuries. When Evaristus became the fifth pope, the church was still a small, scattered flock in the vast Roman Empire, but it was growing. The seeds planted by Peter and watered by the blood of martyrs were beginning to take root in more communities. Evaristus understood that growth demanded structure, even in times of danger. Tradition credits him with dividing the city of Rome into distinct parishes, each with its own priest, a practical decision that allowed believers to gather more safely and receive pastoral care even if certain leaders were arrested or killed. He also appointed deacons to assist in the daily life of the church, ensuring that the care of the poor, the sick, and the widows was never neglected. We know little else of Evaristus's life, but what survives tells us enough. He, too, sealed his mission with martyrdom during the reign of Emperor Trajan. By his time, the role of pope had already become something constant, a shepherd who would lead, teach, and, if necessary, die for the faith. In Evaristus, we see the continuity of courage and service, the same unbroken line that began with Peter and has stretched, against all odds, through every generation since. 5 men, 5 lives poured out for the faith. From Peter's bold witness in the heart of the empire, to Linus's quiet perseverance, to Anacletus's hidden yet vital work, to Clement's enduring voice, and Evaristus's steady hand, each carried the weight of the church in a time when the cost of leadership was almost always death. They were not rulers in the worldly sense. They had no armies, no palaces, no political power. What they had was faith, a faith so deep that it could not be silenced by threats, prisons, or even the sword. Their courage became the bedrock of the papacy, and their witness still speaks today. The church survives not because of comfort, but because of conviction. If this journey through the first 5 popes has inspired you, I'd love to hear which story spoke to you most. Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you want to walk further into the rich history of the church, tap that subscribe button, because we've only just begun this journey.